They were dying of thirst, lost deep in the desert, when a sandy-colored dog emerged from the shimmering heat. Silent, watchful, and somehow waiting. It led them to water, then vanished without a trace. Days later, they found its grave, buried beside human bones. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The road was supposed to loop back. That's what the GPS promised. A scenic shortcut through the desert, past the ruins of a mining outpost that had become a minor attraction for college kids and travel bloggers. Luke had found it on Reddit. Emily, tired from a 10-hour shift at the hospital and still rubbing a tension knot out of her neck, hadn't argued. She never did when Luke got that spark in his eyes, the one that made him feel like the world still had corners worth exploring. Now she regretted every mile past the last gas station. The gravel had long since turned to powdery orange sand. The sun was dropping fast, dragging the heat with it. Shadows spilled across the arid terrain, long and jagged, stretching like fingers. Even with the AC blasting, Emily could feel sweat dampening the small of her back. Luke sat in the passenger seat, camera in his lap, fiddling with the cracked edge of his phone. His voice was chipper but thin. "It's probably just up ahead. These roads always look sketchy before they get interesting." Emily didn't respond. She was too busy watching the dashboard, where the fuel gauge had begun its slow descent into the red. She tapped it, as if that would help. No signal, no cell towers, no landmarks, just sand, heat, and that sick feeling curling low in her stomach. The Jeep coughed. Then it sputtered. Emily gripped the wheel tighter. "Don't you dare!" It dared. The engine made a sound like it was swallowing gravel, shuddered once, then died completely. The sudden silence hit like a slap. No hum, no fan, no air. She leaned back in her seat, exhaling through her teeth. Luke laughed, a short, anxious bark. Okay, this is fixable." Emily said nothing. Because she was already doing the mental math. They were at least 50 miles from the last rest stop. They had a half bottle of water left, a dead phone, no shade, and a vehicle that sounded like it had just had a heart attack. And the sun was going down. "I think we're lost," Luke said finally, quietly. Emily didn't look at him. She was staring at the horizon, where the heat shimmered like glass over the sand. And she realized they hadn't seen another human being in over 6 hours. The desert didn't wake up with them. It was already awake, watching. Emily cracked open her eyes to a sheet of blinding light slicing through the Jeep's windshield. Her tongue felt thick. Her skin was dry, tight across her lips, her neck. The air smelled like sunburned plastic and stale breath. The windows were rolled down a few inches, but there was no wind. Only the crushing stillness of a landscape that hadn't changed in 1,000 years. Luke was curled in the passenger seat, hoodie bunched behind his head, camera strap wound tight around his wrist like a lifeline. He was still asleep, or pretending to be. Emily didn't blame him. She shifted slowly, feeling the stiff protest of her back and the sweat that had dried into salt along her shirt collar. She reached into the center console, pulled out the bottle, their last, and held it up. Less than a third remained. She allowed herself one measured sip, then another for Luke, gently nudging him awake. His eyes opened halfway, red and unfocused. She pressed the bottle into his hands. He drank like it hurt. The sun was climbing fast, higher and whiter than yesterday. Emily stepped outside, her sneakers sinking slightly into sand that already radiated warmth like a buried fire. The silence pressed on her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat. They had to move. Staying with the car would make them a target, for heat stroke, for dehydration, for buzzards that already circled high above like sleepy sentinels. Luke joined her outside, shielding his eyes with a trembling hand. He wasn't joking anymore. "How far, you think?" he asked. "Far," she replied. "But if we keep heading east, we'll hit the highway eventually." "You sure?" She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. They packed the essentials. Luke stuffed the camera into his backpack as if it mattered now. Emily checked her phone one last time. No signal, just that hollow SOS only icon that mocked her every time she looked. By 10 a.m., the heat was already unbearable. The sand reflected the sun like a mirror. They walked in silence. The only sounds were the crunch of their shoes and the occasional rasp of wind that died before it could cool their skin. Luke stumbled first. Not far, just a misstep, but it was enough to make Emily stop. His lips were cracked, his eyes sunken. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just dizzy." They pressed on, but the air felt heavier with every step, as if the desert were waiting for something to break, and it wouldn't have to wait long. The desert plays tricks on tired eyes. That's what Emily had always heard. Heat waves could bend light, twist shadows, make distant rocks look like lakes and emptiness shimmer like movement. She clung to that explanation as her breath quickened and her vision started to swim. They had been walking for hours. Her arms felt numb. Her skin burned beneath her shirt, despite the long sleeves. Luke was trailing behind now, his camera bag slung low, dragging at his shoulder like it weighed 100 pounds. His steps had turned sluggish, aimless, like he was being steered by instinct alone. Emily blinked hard and scanned the endless tan sea around them. And that's when she saw it. A shape, just ahead, caught in the rippling curtain of heat, dark, low to the ground, and moving. She stopped. Her first thought, coyote. But it moved too straight, too calm. A hallucination, maybe. But the figure didn't waver or flicker like the mirages she'd seen before. It solidified. A dog, large, sandy-colored, broad-shouldered but lean, like it belonged to the desert. No collar, no leash. Its tongue hung out slightly, panting in the heat. It made no sound, just stood there, watching her with steady, intelligent eyes. Emily's heart knocked once against her ribs. "Luke," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. She turned, throat dry. "Luke!" He stumbled up beside her, squinting. "What?" She pointed ahead. "Do you see that?" Luke followed her gaze. At first, he didn't react. Then his brow furrowed. "That's a dog." Emily nodded, but the dog didn't approach. It turned, slowly, like it was waiting for them, then began walking away, toward the rocks to the southeast. Luke gave a weak laugh. "Well, we're hallucinating the same thing." "No," Emily said, already moving. "No, I don't think we are." The dog kept walking, just far enough ahead to stay out of reach, just close enough to stay in sight. Every few dozen paces, it stopped, looked over its shoulder, and then kept going. There was no hesitation in its steps, no fear. It wasn't wandering. It was leading. And they were too tired and too desperate not to follow. The dog moved like it had done this before. There was no wasted motion, no frantic tail wagging or nervous circling. It trotted with measured purpose, cutting through patches of shade and heat with equal confidence, always glancing back, always making sure they were still coming. Emily and Luke followed without speaking. They had long passed the threshold where conversation felt useful. Words required moisture. So did thinking. The desert had stripped them down to movement and breath. Their world had become sand, sky, sun, and now, this silent creature whose presence both unsettled and anchored them. Emily kept her eyes on the dog's paws, how they barely disturbed the earth, how its tan fur blended into the terrain like camouflage designed by nature itself. She felt something hum beneath her ribs. Not fear exactly, but the low thrum of being watched by something older. Something that belonged here in a way they never would. The dog led them around a bluff of jagged rocks, then paused at a shallow overhang, almost a cave, barely high enough to crouch beneath. There, half hidden by brush and thyme, sat a battered old metal cooler. Luke stumbled forward and dropped to his knees beside it. He wrenched it open. The hinges screamed, but the lid gave way. Inside, 5 sealed water bottles, dust-covered but untouched, still cold from the vacuum insulation. He let out a breath that almost turned into a sob. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Emily didn't say anything. She was staring at the dog. It stood several feet away, still watching them, tail low, panting lightly. Not eager, not demanding, just observing. Luke handed her a bottle, his hands shaking. She twisted off the cap and drank, slowly at first, then in desperate gulps. The water tasted metallic, slightly plastic. It was the best thing she'd ever swallowed. She knelt, splashing some across her neck and the backs of her hands. Luke finished half a bottle in seconds and leaned back against the rock wall, eyes closed. When Emily looked up again, the dog was gone. No bark, no footsteps, no retreating figure in the sand. Just empty space and a silence so deep it seemed to breathe. She stood, shielding her eyes. Nothing. No prints, no trail. It was as if the desert had absorbed the dog right back into itself. The sun dipped behind a slab of red stone, casting their temporary shelter in slanted amber light. Emily sat with her knees tucked to her chest, sipping from the water bottle in small, controlled mouthfuls, every nerve tuned to the strange quiet that had returned. Luke rested with his eyes closed, still too pale, his breath shallow but steady. But Emily couldn't rest. The water had revived her body, but not her thoughts. The image of the dog lingered like a phantom, its shape, its knowing gaze, its silent command to follow. She hadn't imagined it. Luke had seen it too, and it had led them here, to survival. But why? Her gaze drifted to the gap in the rocks where the sand had pooled into a shallow basin. The wind had shifted again, soft and rhythmic, like distant breathing. It stirred the dust along the arroyo, pulling back the top layer in delicate spirals, and something beneath it caught the light. She stood slowly. "I'll be right back," she said over her shoulder. Luke gave a faint grunt, half asleep. She stepped down into the basin, boots crunching lightly. A few feet beyond the cooler, sheltered under a lip of stone, the wind had uncovered something unnatural. The edges of a handmade cross, 2 splintered sticks lashed together with twine, planted in a mound of loosely packed dirt. Emily froze. Her mind immediately reached for rational explanations. Old marker? A trail sign? But her gut said otherwise. She crouched, brushing away sand with her fingertips. The cross swayed slightly, the twine frayed by sun and age. And at its base, the ground dipped, shallow and uneven. She found a torn piece of canvas. Beneath it, bone, dry, bleached, human. Her breath caught in her throat. A foot away, partially buried, was a rusted tin plate, weather-beaten but intact. She picked it up. Scratched into the surface with what looked like a knife were 5 crude letters. S-C-O-U-T. Emily staggered back, heart hammering. The dog had a name. The dog had a grave. She looked behind her, half expecting to see it again, tail flicking in the distance, watching her with those strange, soulful eyes. But the rocks were empty. The desert held its breath. Back at the overhang, Luke had sat up, blinking. "What is it?" he asked. Emily swallowed hard. I don't know, she said, but we're not the first ones it tried to save. The desert became colder than expected once the sun vanished behind the rocks. Emily sat with her arms wrapped tight around her knees, trying to preserve what little warmth lingered in her skin. Her shirt clung to her from dried sweat, and the breeze that rolled in after nightfall cut deeper than she thought dry air ever could. But she wasn't shivering from the cold. She was thinking about Scout. The name etched into the tin plate sat heavy in her memory now. She hadn't told Luke the rest, about the canvas scrap, about the bones. He didn't need that weight tonight. Not yet. They had finished a second bottle of water between them. Luke seemed stronger now, enough to sit upright and speak in full sentences, but his voice remained low, as if afraid to interrupt something sacred. "There's no way that dog was real," he said finally. Emily didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because she couldn't bring herself to lie. Instead, she stared into the dark, past the outline of their tiny campfire. A weak thing built from dry brush and cracked twigs they'd found in the shade. It gave off more smoke than heat, but it kept the shadows from getting too close. That's when she heard it again. Soft at first, like the scrape of paws on stone. A rhythm too consistent to be the wind, too purposeful to be imagined. She turned. Nothing. Luke noticed her posture. "What?" "Nothing. Just thought I heard something." "Me too," he said after a pause. "Sounded like breathing." Neither of them moved. The fire popped. The silence stretched. Then, behind the rock where they'd first seen the cooler, something stirred. A soft scrape. And then, a low, deliberate exhale. Not threatening. Not loud. Just present. Emily rose slowly, inching toward the sound. Luke followed, lips parted, eyes wide. But when they turned the corner, there was nothing. No dog. No shadow. Only a small depression in the sand. Like something had been lying there recently. Still warm. "I swear," Luke whispered. "I know," she said. They didn't sleep much. Every gust of wind felt like a breath. Every scuffle of sand, a step. Every time Emily closed her eyes, she saw those calm, watchful eyes again. Not imagined, not dreamt, but imprinted. And when the dawn came, stretching pale fingers over the jagged horizon, Luke nudged her wordlessly. She followed his gaze. Through the morning haze, barely visible but unmistakably real, stood a cell tower. Sharp. Vertical. Salvation. They'd walked right past it. Or maybe they hadn't been ready to see it until now. Emily had never been so afraid to hope. The tower rose above the horizon like a promise she didn't dare trust. Its slender metal frame shimmered slightly in the early heat, partially obscured by rippling air and morning dust. It looked both impossibly close and dangerously far, like the mirage of a lifeboat drifting just out of reach. Still, she couldn't stop staring at it. His lips were dry and bleeding now, but his eyes locked on the same point in the sky as hers. "That's real," he said. Not a question. A plea. Emily nodded. "It has to be." They packed in silence. 2 bottles of water left, 1 protein bar, half a charge on the old solar battery Luke had clipped to his bag days ago and forgotten about. It might be enough. They walked slowly at first, then faster, legs still aching but minds clear. Every step toward the tower felt like a question being answered. She pulled it from her pocket, still blinking, still cracked. 1 bar, then 2. Signal. She froze. Luke stared at her, not breathing. She turned the phone toward him. 911. Emergency call only. She pressed it. The call connected before the first ring finished. Rescue came faster than she thought possible. A Ranger helicopter spotted them within the hour, kicking up a sandstorm as it landed. Men in beige uniforms rushed forward with blankets, water, shade. Emily tried to explain, but her voice cracked and broke under the strain of relief. Luke said nothing at all. He just wept quietly into his sleeves. Later, once vitals were taken and IVs connected, a deputy came over to take a statement. A weathered man with sun-damaged skin and steady eyes. "You followed what now?" he asked. "A dog," Emily said. "Big, sandy-colored, no collar. Led us to water, to shelter." The deputy's face didn't change, but something in his gaze shifted, a flicker of recognition. "Any chance it had a cloudy right eye?" Emily blinked. "Yes, it did. Why?" The deputy looked off toward the rocks, then back at her. "There used to be a dog out here. Name was Scout. Belonged to a solo hiker. Young guy. Disappeared 5 years ago. We searched for days. Never found the hiker. But we found the dog. Dead. Curled up under a ledge. Right eye clouded. Hadn't moved from his owner's grave." Emily's throat tightened. She didn't speak again until the helicopter took off and the desert shrank away beneath them. And even then, she didn't tell them everything. Not about the grave, not about the bones, not about the tin plate that said Scout. Some things, she realized, weren't meant for reports. Some things stayed sacred in the sand. They came back a week later. The ranger had offered to drive them, but Emily said no. It didn't feel right. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a return, a gesture, a promise to something that had once been alive, and maybe, in some way, still was. The desert looked different now, less monstrous. The heat still pulsed, and the rocks still reached for the sky like jagged prayers. But the fear was gone. Emily saw lines in the terrain she hadn't noticed before. Paths that might have always been there but had remained hidden until she'd learned how to look. They found the place by instinct. The overhang was the same, weathered and stoic, its shelter still casting a pool of shadow that whispered relief. The cooler was still there, empty now, its lid cracked but open like a jaw left ajar in surprise. The makeshift grave hadn't been disturbed. Emily knelt beside it and brushed the sand away with the palm of her hand. The wood of the cross was dry and splitting. She reinforced the twine with a new length she'd brought in her pack, winding it tight, anchoring it deeper into the earth. Luke stood behind her, silent, holding the object they'd spent the last hour preparing. A fresh tin plate, polished and clean. On it, stamped carefully with a set of borrowed steel letters, were 3 simple words. Scout, still watching. He handed it to her without a word. She pressed it gently into the sand at the base of the cross, then leaned back on her heels. A wind passed through the rocks, not harsh, but present, like breath, like acknowledgement. Neither of them said much. There wasn't anything left to say. They stayed for an hour, maybe more. The sun rose higher. Shadows shifted. At one point, Luke thought he heard something moving through the sand behind them, soft pads, a low rustle. But when he turned, there was only the breeze and a distant bird call. Eventually they rose. Before they left, Emily turned and poured a ribbon of clean water across the grave. Not to water it, not to sanctify it, just to give something back. Then they walked away, side by side, boots crunching over the earth. They didn't look back. They didn't have to. They knew they weren't walking out alone.